Hello and welcome. In this video, what we're going to be looking at is the play Wit by Margaret Edson. Now, this play is a very somber story, but also a very heartfelt story about a woman who is dying from ovarian cancer. And it goes through her final moments of life. It uses a number of various techniques to engage emotionally with the audience, including flashbacks. And it uses a number of different ideas and makes a number of allusions, particularly to John Donne's poetry, and particularly Death Be Not Proud, in order to communicate a message about death and ultimately about life as well. So let's just go through the basics of the play first. It's Wit, or sometimes written as with a semicolon, is a play by Margaret Edson. It portrays the final moments of Professor Vivian Bearing, who is the main character of the play, and she is dying, as I said before, of ovarian cancer. Now, this play won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama in 1999 and was inspired by Edson's own work as a nurse in a cancer ward. So it is based off relatively true accounts, and it is based on actual human experience, which is ultimately what this play is about. It is about the human experience. And certainly, the human experience, according to someone who has probably spent their entire life avoiding the human experience, and certainly for the play to tie that together with her really embracing the human spirit towards the conclusion of it, we sort of start to feel this sense of ultimately not only a connection to life through death, but also an understanding of what life and death actually are as concepts and as constructs, for that matter. Alright, let's start with just a brief overview of the play, and we'll just go through the play from start to finish, just a very quick version of it. So it begins with Bearing dressed in a hospital gown and a baseball cap, addressing the audience directly, and she does this quite frequently throughout the play. So she's really just talking directly to the audience as you want someone who is talking of real experience about what they're going through. And certainly these monologues are one of those things that do that really help her to convey her experience from a more personal level rather than what we can really interpret just from the outside looking in. And it starts with a very poignant sort of line, "Hi, how are you feeling today?" which is both a meaningful and a meaningless question. Okay, meaningless in the context of the actual question itself, and that's a very token gesture, it doesn't really mean anything. But meaningful, as it's a question that's representative of pretty much how she's lived her life. She's used to really asking these insincere sort of questions and feeling this insincerity towards other people. And it's only until she sort of sees it happening to herself, not that this is necessarily what it inspires her into feeling differently, but it's one of those things that she sort of feels like how she's treated a lot of her life as something of a not emotional, but something to be questioned and challenged anyway. And certainly that sort of thing, that idea of something to be studied, that I don't really care what your answer is something that is sort of part and parcel of what she is. And certainly as it's reflected in the play and as it's reflected through the cast of characters, particularly through the doctors, we sort of see that statement being repeated. She also then outlines her condition, the ovarian cancer, which is about to claim her. So it is a very, very, I guess, morbid beginning to the play. However, it keeps this sense of humour, and this sort of sense of humour is what sort of, offsets a lot of that morbidity that particularly we get throughout the play. And ultimately, it's one of those things as well that still start to lead towards the happier messages of the play, and certainly the ideas of compassion, kindness, and those sorts of things. Those that journey towards feeling not only, a sense of enlightenment, but also a sense of compassion, which was lacking for her life, and really realizing what it means to actually have compassion and actually to feel those sorts of things. So then she meets with Dr Kelekian, who is an insensitive doctor, and one that reminds her quite a bit of herself. And through this encounter with this doctor, and indeed through the others that she encounters as well, she sort of starts to feel like she did when she was, or basically it's almost a role reversal in that she was once the one who studied things, who was very clinical about her approach and didn't really care for anything other than language, which particularly if you're a scholar of Donne is one of the things that you would really care about. And so basically finds herself almost weakened by the fact that she's a patient. However, she does find that she can still continue to stimulate herself by learning lots of different kinds of medical terminology which are being used in treating her condition. And so this is part of the ways that this world and these two worlds tie themselves in together. This language world, which she has spent a lot of her life living through her study of literature, and the one which has found herself in hospital with cancer. The two worlds are sort of intermingled and sort of overlapped. He invites her to be part of a trial for a new treatment method, and this sort of drives a little bit of the story forward, in that it's not just about her struggle to survive, it's about her being a subject, being a research topic, and certainly in a way that one would consider for an academic. I mean, academics are involved in the process of research all the time, so to be the one being researched upon is sort of, again, that role reversal experience. And seeing as she's used to study of death, and she mentions this quite often in the beginning, she not only sees the irony in being studied, but she also feels like she has an understanding of the concept of death, seeing as she has studied Donne her whole life, and a lot of Donne's poetry is about the nature of death and what it means to pass from one world into the next. Okay, the play then goes through her treatment as well and her failing health, yet her will to learn more about her disease and her uncompromising wit are two of the driving forces of not only her character, but also of the humour and nature of the story. In that it doesn't focus on the negatives, and it does obviously pass over them, and it certainly does refer to the pain that she's in and the suffering, but also more so it focuses on her bravery and also the wit as well. And that sort of sense of humour that comes across in those sort of dry one-liners that she throws every so often is indicative of someone who doesn't want to be known as just basically a patient, that she's happy being a patient and she's happy being a subject studied as a sort of I guess an ironic situation, but she still has a lot to offer. And two characters also become key in this story, which is Jason, who is an aloof doctor who was one of her students, and so she feels a connection with him, and a connection with, I guess, the person he is, one who's very clinical in his approach, who hates the part of medicine which has to deal with people, all those sorts of things. So he's one that he finds cancer fascinating and exciting because it's something that's so interesting for him to study. And Susie, who is a complete opposite of virtually all the other characters, in that she's compassionate and that she's not necessarily intellectual, and certainly portrayed as someone who isn't quite intellectual, but has a sense of kindness and has a way of making Bearing bring out another side of herself, and certainly we see that as the play goes on. The story continues to be told through flashbacks, and certainly these flashbacks are quite important, between her teaching days, her childhood, and then back towards her treatment and her current situation. And these are nice juxtapositions between her formal life and her current situation. And though she feels she initially knows death through Donne, she eventually realises she does not truly know it, and finds more comfort learning compassion. And certainly these form nice contrasts, particularly her childhood self, this little girl who was obsessed with reading books and learning language, from her university self who was almost arrogant in the way that she looked at things, compared to this compassion that she's learning. And certainly Susie brings out a bit of that in her. She also signs a DNR, or do not resuscitate, which basically is a statement to say that she wants to die on her own terms, like sort of Death Be Not Proud, where the persona actually is conquering death in their own way. And certainly it also plays into earlier references to the poem throughout. And so this sort of almost indicates that death is somewhat being weakened by the fact that she's choosing to accept it. It's not something that's going to claim her in a slow and devastating way. It's going to be one that she she at least can choose something about her death, which is that she can choose that once she does go, not to be brought back and then to go again. We also get a scene towards the end where we see a visit from her old professor, Ashford, and reveals this insight as well, and that she suddenly doesn't want to learn Donne. She wants to almost be back to her childhood. And so Ashford, instead of reading a verse from Donne, reads her a story which she bought for her great-grandson who she's visiting. And so this again is representative of that change, and certainly representative of that journey from life to death. Now, in her final moments, doctors do begin resuscitating her, and it's only once Susie steps in and pleads that the DNR has been signed that the doctors stop and she is allowed to pass. And from that point, she undresses, steps towards the light at the end of the stage, and that is the conclusion of the play. So we've had that big change from where she is at the beginning, someone who is still very much her own self, even though that the cancer obviously has had an impact on her life and certainly has an impact on her condition. However, it's only towards the end of the play that we see a change in her, her ideas towards life, and certainly her way of looking at the world has completely been altered. And so this is one of the main ideas and themes of the story, is just basically this transition. And certainly as she gets closer to death, she realizes what is valuable in life. Okay, so let's look at the context of Wit now and what is important about it. Okay, it is, as I said before, based on her own work as a cancer nurse, and it basically follows a lot of the experiences, and certainly that the author herself, or the playwright, should I say, herself has said that she was inspired by the courage and bravery of a lot of these women who were suffering, and yet didn't want to indicate that they were suffering in any great sort of way. And she, as I said, she was based on the bravery of those who she treated. She basically was inspired to write it. It's representative of a modern age where cancer is a major community topic, and you certainly have to look at this play in relation to the idea that cancer is something that has affected a lot of families, and certainly it affects many now. And a cancer such as ovarian cancer, which is very aggressive, very hard to treat and very hard to detect, is one which, through literature, we sort of get a bit of an understanding of how it affects people, not just in terms of medical, but in terms of spiritual, psychological, all those other things. And certainly that's one of the things that we really do get out of this play. So it's one of those really modern ideas where cancer is something that is talked about, and certainly talked about it in terms of the fact that it takes lives. And it's one of those really strong plays that actually shows, I guess, more of an emotional side of death, more so than necessarily a statistical side, or one that's just purely relegated to talking about the disease. It also reflects the modern working woman, her relationships and her ambitions. And certainly we see this in Bearing's character, where while she may be a little bit archetypal in that she is, I guess, a typical academic, she is a modern academic, and she's a female academic, which I suppose if you're looking at this 50 years ago, you wouldn't have seen too many of these references. However, that's not necessarily to say that it's the main point of the play that it is a female academic. It's to do with the fact that it's reflective of the values of a modern woman, that the one that has got a career-driven woman who is not necessarily attached to a husband, or is driven by the desire to have children. And even though she sort of feels that way towards the end, that she may have liked to have some more close friends and family, she doesn't necessarily, I guess, define her life by that. And certainly it's reflective of more modern values. And if you compare it to, if you'll take an example Donne, as is referenced in the play, then the values are quite different, and certainly the texts she studied are quite historic, and yet the values that the play represents are quite modern and quite true. The characters as well are quite highly intellectual and often impersonal, and it's reflecting, I guess, a stereotypical aloof academic society, or one that's sort of out of touch with the rest of society. And by this out of touchness, it's almost literally in this case, in that her character doesn't really have a lot of friends. She's alone. She's a loner, and so it's sort of representing her as, I guess, someone who's almost outcast herself from the rest of society. And certainly we see that, with a lot of the other characters, particularly the other doctors, that they are impersonal with the way that they deal with people. The protagonist is arguably, as I said before, a modern archetype, a loner, unmarried woman obsessed with knowledge. And so it's one of those characters, I guess, it's been created out of this sort of academic society mold of someone who is so driven by her work that she neglects, I guess, the personal aspects of her life. And certainly you see a lot of these stories now, and it's one of those, I guess, texts that is quite representative of a lot of modern works. Other characters also reflect these values as well, and doctors view patients as subjects as one such example of, I guess, an aloof society, which, again, is disconnected from people, which looks at things in terms of logic and in terms of scientific discovery, rather than as people who have real needs, desires, wishes, and dreams, and so forth. And so this, I guess, overlapping of the academic world and, I guess, the humanistic world, the one that has feelings and thoughts and seeks compassion, is one of the key ideas of this play. There's also a number of conventions here of modern theatre. And when we talk about modern theatre, it is basically anything which includes a lot of modern technologies. Now, modern technologies in this case is as simple as lighting, as simple as, I guess, more dynamic props and machines and things along those lines. And so it uses a lot of these conventions, and certainly they are things which define it as being a modern play, not just lighting, and certainly that's not the thing that defines the play the most. Vivian's character frequently also breaks the fourth wall, in that it's postmodern in the sense that she's talking directly to the audience. So usually when you're looking at a play, you've got, essentially, it's almost contained in a box. The audience has no input. Whereas in this play, the audience does have an input because they're being addressed by the speaker, sort of like a soliloquy. However, it goes a bit of a step further, in that it's talking directly to them. It's addressing them as you would direct an audience. So those sorts of, again, that's one of the techniques which is representative of postmodern work, one that challenges the traditional styles of certainly plays and the playwrights. There is also no intermission or acts in this play either, and it's one that goes from beginning to end without a stop. Now, you might think, oh, poor actors, what does this mean for the rest of the play? Well, it means that it's one of those plays that sort of doesn't give you a chance to digest it towards the end. And it's very relentless in its, I guess, its assault-like fashion in terms of the issues it raises and confronts. There's no intermission. There's no chance for people to go into the foyer and have a giggle around afterwards. It basically just keeps reinforcing, I guess, these ideas, and certainly helps to convey a very smooth narrative that very subtly but very gradually, I guess, leads from her change from being this, as I mentioned before, aloof academic to someone who has discovered compassion. And while she's not necessarily in a position to, I guess, change her life around, she has learned some valued lessons in life, and certainly it allows her to, I guess, experience what she really did value in her life, and certainly before it was too late, to be able to find the things which would define her, and certainly would define her in death as well. So that's basically it for the context and the summary of Wit. Until next time, I'll see you later.